America is witnessing something it hasn't seen in decades: a nationwide purge. In 2025, mass deportations exploded across the country, with states unleashing police, jails, and even new laws to push undocumented immigrants out. Families were torn apart, communities emptied overnight, and billions poured into enforcement. And here's the brutal truth: 2026 will be worse. States aren't backing down. They're doubling down, writing harsher laws, expanding 287G programs, and criminalizing sanctuary protections. The gloves are off, and the crackdown is escalating. These are the 10 U.S. states where the deportation machine is only getting started. Number 10. South Carolina. In 2025, South Carolina moved from being a quiet enforcer to one of the most vocal states pushing for stricter immigration policies. After years of frustration with rising numbers of undocumented immigrants, estimated at nearly 120,000 in South Carolina alone, lawmakers introduced measures to force every county jail to cooperate with ICE. By mid-2025, bills had been written to make immigration status checks mandatory for anyone arrested, no matter the charge. Even more striking was the discussion of creating a $500 reward fund for tips that lead directly to deportations. That concept gained national attention as critics compared it to bounty-style enforcement, while supporters praised it as a way to involve communities in the crackdown. Why is South Carolina turning up the heat? The answer lies in both economics and public safety concerns. In 2025, the state documented a 15% increase in costs for social services tied to migrants who lacked legal status, from healthcare access in emergency rooms to schooling for children without documentation. Local sheriffs argued that counties were footing millions in bills they couldn't sustain. On the enforcement side, state leaders pointed to high-profile crimes involving undocumented individuals, which they said eroded public trust and demanded action. This narrative resonated strongly with voters, especially in suburban and rural counties. The political atmosphere also shifted in 2025. With neighboring Georgia and Florida enacting tough measures, South Carolina legislators felt pressure not to become a soft spot in the Southeast. That's why 2026 is shaping up to be even harsher. If the state fully funds its planned enforcement initiatives and expands its collaboration with ICE through 287G agreements, we could see deportations rise by 20 to 30% compared to 2025 levels. The groundwork has already been laid. 2025 was the trial run, but 2026 is when the real impact will be felt. South Carolina may not be the biggest immigration state, but it's quickly becoming one of the toughest enforcers in the nation. Number 9. Mississippi. Mississippi has long been overlooked in national conversations about immigration, but 2025 changed everything. Legislators introduced the Mississippi Immigration Enforcement Act, a sweeping proposal that set the stage for one of the nation's most aggressive crackdowns. The bill sought to push every county jail into 287G agreements with ICE, meaning local sheriffs would be directly deputized to enforce federal immigration law. What made headlines was the extraordinary clause granting the governor power to remove any sheriff or police chief who failed to cooperate. That level of state control is rare, and it signaled just how serious Mississippi was about removing undocumented immigrants. Economically, the pressure is clear. Mississippi ranks among the poorest states in America, with a median household income around $55,000, far below the national median. State leaders argued that supporting undocumented immigrants was straining resources already stretched thin. Estimates suggested nearly 35,000 undocumented immigrants live in Mississippi, and state officials highlighted costs of more than $100 million annually in education, healthcare, and public services. In 2025, frustration boiled over as hospitals and school districts demanded relief. The political climate also contributed. With states like Texas and Florida leading the charge, Mississippi leaders did not want to be seen as lagging behind in the South. Several counties began actively lobbying for stronger state backing to handle growing migrant populations. Critics claimed the laws risked civil rights abuses, but supporters insisted the changes were essential for security and sustainability. Looking toward 2026, the prediction is straightforward. Mississippi's enforcement efforts will intensify. If the state fully implements mandatory 287G programs, deportations could rise 25% year over year. More importantly, by empowering the governor to remove non-compliant law enforcement officers, Mississippi is creating an enforcement culture where refusing ICE cooperation is simply not an option. For a state with fewer immigrants than border regions, the crackdown may seem symbolic, but the policies are real and will make Mississippi one of the toughest places to live without legal status in 2026. Number 8. Alabama. Alabama is no stranger to hardline immigration laws. Back in 2011, the state passed one of the toughest immigration bills in the country, and in 2025, that legacy returned with new force. Lawmakers pushed fresh mandates requiring law enforcement officers to verify immigration status whenever there is reasonable suspicion during a stop or arrest. This move effectively revives the "Show me your papers" framework, making undocumented immigrants far more visible to enforcement. Police officers are now legally bound to forward information to federal authorities, meaning that every minor traffic violation could end up as a deportation trigger. What drove this? Numbers tell the story. Alabama's undocumented immigrant population is estimated at 85,000, not huge compared to Texas or California, but significant in a state where total population sits under 5 million. State officials claim costs for undocumented residents in education and healthcare top $250 million annually, which they frame as unsustainable for a state with limited tax revenue. In 2025, sheriffs from Jefferson and Mobile counties testified that their jails were housing more undocumented detainees than ever before, adding millions in costs to local budgets. Politically, 2025 was an election year for several state officials, and immigration became a winning issue. Legislators promised voters they would clean up the system, and the new laws reflect that campaign pressure. Critics warn about civil rights violations and racial profiling, but supporters argue the state is finally aligning with its neighbors Georgia and Florida. The prediction for 2026? Alabama will see a surge in removals. With every county sheriff required to cooperate with ICE, and with police empowered to check status proactively, deportations could rise 30% compared to 2025 levels. The atmosphere in Alabama is shifting toward near-zero tolerance. For undocumented immigrants, this means daily life, going to work, driving kids to school, or even a traffic stop, could be enough to start the deportation process. By 2026, Alabama will be one of the most inhospitable states in the country for those without legal status. Number 7. Tennessee. Tennessee's transformation in 2025 was remarkable. The legislature passed a groundbreaking measure, making it a felony for local officials to even vote in favor of sanctuary-style policies. That single provision sent a message louder than any border wall. Tennessee is not playing games. By criminalizing political support for sanctuary protections, the state effectively shut down any local resistance and forced every city and county into alignment with federal enforcement. Beyond symbolism, the law came with teeth. A new grant program provided millions in funding to sheriff's offices and police departments that partnered with ICE. This money was earmarked for additional detention capacity, transport services, and training officers under the 287G program, which deputizes local law enforcement as immigration agents. By the end of 2025, several major counties, including Davidson and Knox, were already negotiating deeper agreements with ICE. Economically, leaders in Nashville and Memphis raised alarms about rising costs for emergency services, with estimates topping $300 million annually connected to undocumented immigrant populations. Lawmakers used these figures as justification for the crackdown, arguing that the state could no longer subsidize what they called a federal failure. Meanwhile, public polling in 2025 showed 2/3 of Tennessee voters supported tougher laws, giving politicians the mandate they needed. What does this mean for 2026? Expect Tennessee to double down. With laws already in place, local governments risk jail time if they resist. Deportations are projected to increase 35% compared to 2025, as counties expand their capacity to detain and hand over individuals to ICE. Unlike some states where sanctuary cities create uneven enforcement, Tennessee is ensuring total consistency statewide. The style here is clear: Tennessee is using punishment, money, and political force to build one of the most comprehensive state-led deportation systems in the country. By 2026, anyone without legal status in Tennessee will face a network designed to funnel them directly into the federal removal pipeline. Number 6. Illinois. Illinois may not be the first state that comes to mind when discussing mass deportations, but by 2025, it was at the center of a storm. Chicago in particular faced an overwhelming influx of migrants, with more than 25,000 new arrivals reported over just a single year. The strain on shelters, city budgets, and public services ignited one of the fiercest debates in state history. By late 2025, governor and city officials were slashing programs and reconsidering policies that once made Illinois a so-called sanctuary state. What makes Illinois different is the backlash from local communities. School districts reported overcrowding, hospitals cited tens of millions in unpaid emergency care, and the city of Chicago announced it had already spent over $250 million on migrant support services. That number rattled suburban counties who feared they'd become the next relocation hubs. While Illinois still officially protects undocumented residents, political pressure is forcing a shift. Laws haven't yet matched Texas or Florida, but cracks are forming. Calls for mandatory e-verify, tighter cooperation with ICE, and budget reallocations away from migrant aid are gaining bipartisan traction. For 2026, the writing is on the wall. Illinois is heading into an election year cycle where immigration will dominate. Expect new legislation requiring county jails to report immigration status directly to federal authorities, especially in counties like DuPage and Cook. If passed, Illinois could pivot from being a safe haven to a state with uniform ICE cooperation. Predictions suggest deportations could rise 20% simply from greater compliance at local levels. The shift in Illinois isn't ideological, it's financial. With residents already facing high taxes and record inflation, patience for absorbing migrant costs has evaporated. By 2026, Illinois will likely join the roster of tough enforcement states, driven less by politics and more by budgets. Number 5. Arizona. Arizona is ground zero for immigration battles, and 2025 underscored why. Border apprehensions in the state surged past 400,000 encounters, creating massive political pressure for lawmakers to act. In response, Arizona rolled out Executive Order 2025-01, expanding state-led border operations and pressing local police to work directly with ICE. Legislative debates went even further, with some proposing controversial bounty programs that would pay citizens for reporting undocumented individuals. While the governor threatened vetoes, the sheer willingness to debate these measures shows how aggressive the state's climate has become. Economically, Arizona argues it's paying the price for federal inaction. In 2025, emergency room spending tied to undocumented residents topped $150 million, and school districts near Tucson and Phoenix reported enrollment spikes that forced budget reallocations. With limited resources, the state began lobbying for federal reimbursement while doubling down on enforcement. Border counties like Cochise and Pima led the charge, demanding more state police presence and mandatory ICE holds for anyone arrested. Politically, 2025 hardened public opinion. Polls indicated over 70% of Arizonans wanted stricter immigration enforcement, giving lawmakers cover to push forward. The narrative of Arizona being abandoned by Washington resonated deeply, ensuring the 2026 agenda will be tougher than ever. The prediction for 2026? Expect Arizona to pass new mandates requiring all counties to adopt 287G agreements, effectively deputizing local sheriffs as immigration officers. Deportations could spike by 30 to 35%, particularly in southern counties. For undocumented immigrants, daily life in Arizona will become more dangerous, as both state police and local authorities will be on the lookout. Arizona is no longer just reacting. It's leading an aggressive border-first model that other states may soon copy. Number 4. Georgia. Georgia might not border Mexico, but in 2025 it became one of the most aggressive inland states in immigration enforcement. The game changer was House Bill 1105, which made cooperation with ICE mandatory across the state. Sheriffs and jailers can no longer choose whether to honor ICE detainers. It's required. The law also added a controversial provision mandating DNA collection from non-citizens arrested for certain crimes, a move designed to fast-track deportations and criminal prosecutions. The numbers in Georgia tell a clear story. The undocumented population is estimated at 350,000, concentrated in metro Atlanta and farming regions. State officials pointed to rising public safety costs, with county jails reporting tens of millions annually in expenses tied to undocumented detainees. Add to this a climate of rising wages and tight labor markets, and the debate sharpened. Georgia leaders argued that undocumented workers were undercutting wages while also draining social services. In 2025, enforcement wasn't just about laws, it was about accountability. HB 1105 established state audits for local agencies to ensure compliance, with the threat of funding cuts for non-cooperating counties. This is a direct strike against sanctuary leanings in cities like Atlanta. By the end of 2025, multiple counties had already expanded jail to ICE transfers, fueling a visible uptick in deportations. The prediction for 2026 is tough. With HB 1105 in full effect, deportations could rise by 40%, making Georgia one of the most aggressive inland enforcement states. Unlike border states, Georgia is showing how interior enforcement can reshape immigrant communities through systemic jail cooperation and data tracking. Georgia's approach is different from Texas's brute force. It's bureaucratic precision. By building legal and administrative pipelines, Georgia ensures that 2026 will be the year undocumented immigrants find themselves cornered at every level of the system. Number 3. Florida. Florida is one of the most aggressive states in the country when it comes to immigration enforcement, and 2025 only cemented that reputation. Governor-led initiatives tied state funding and grants directly to E-Verify compliance, meaning every business working with the state must prove its employees' legal status. For contractors, schools, and hospitals, compliance became non-negotiable. Even though parts of Florida's broader immigration law were challenged in court, the sections tied to workplace enforcement and state audits stayed intact, ensuring the pressure remained on both employers and undocumented workers. Florida has unique motivations. The state saw an estimated 800,000 undocumented immigrants by 2025, many working in agriculture, construction, and service industries. At the same time, Florida's public spending on migrant services ballooned past $1 billion annually, straining budgets in Miami-Dade, Broward, and Orlando. In 2025, Miami officials reported housing shortages directly linked to migrant arrivals, which fueled public frustration and political urgency. The social atmosphere was equally intense. Voters demanded stricter laws after reports tied violent crimes to undocumented offenders. Florida leaders used these incidents to argue that sanctuary policies made communities less safe. Businesses were also caught in the crossfire. Construction firms warned about labor shortages, but the state refused to back down, framing the issue as protecting legal workers and reducing costs. Looking ahead to 2026, Florida is expected to double down on E-Verify penalties, expand mandatory ICE cooperation in jails, and pour more funding into state-level enforcement teams. Predictions suggest deportations could rise 30 to 40%, especially as counties face audits and risk losing millions in grants if they fail to comply. The message is clear. In Florida, undocumented immigrants face enforcement not just from police but from the workplace, housing market, and public services. Number 2. Louisiana. Louisiana shocked the country in 2025 by passing some of the harshest immigration measures in America. The centerpiece was Act 399, which made it a felony for law enforcement officers to ignore ICE detainers. That's not just unusual, it's unprecedented. Sheriffs, jailers, and even city police chiefs could face prison time if they refused to cooperate with federal immigration authorities. This turned Louisiana into a national case study in how states can force compliance. The state's argument was financial and cultural. With an undocumented population of around 150,000, Louisiana leaders estimated annual costs exceeding $300 million, largely in healthcare and public education. Cities like New Orleans and Baton Rouge felt overwhelmed by rising demands, while rural parishes worried about becoming relocation zones. By late 2025, the Attorney General was actively pressuring sanctuary-leaning localities to dismantle protections, threatening lawsuits and state takeovers if they refused. The politics were unmistakable. In a state where conservative lawmakers dominate, immigration enforcement became a top campaign promise, and Act 399 delivered. Beyond detainers, other bills required agencies to track undocumented residents receiving state benefits, and penalties for non-compliance grew harsher with each proposal. For 2026, expect Louisiana to push even further. With Act 399 in place, deportations from jails could rise 35%, as sheriffs have no legal way to avoid cooperation. The ripple effect will also spread to schools, hospitals, and employers, as the state looks to tie more funding to immigration checks. Louisiana is sending a strong message. Undocumented immigrants will find little protection here. By 2026, the state will rank just behind Texas in its aggressiveness, showing how deep the South's crackdown has become. Number 1. Texas. Texas remains the epicenter of America's immigration enforcement battle. In 2025, the state rolled out Senate Bill 4 and Senate Bill 8, landmark measures that reshaped the landscape. SB 4 gave police authority to arrest individuals suspected of unlawful entry, while SB 8 mandated that every county join 287G agreements with ICE by January 1, 2026. This combination made Texas the most coordinated state in the nation for deportation pipelines. The numbers are staggering. Texas already handles more than 40% of all U.S. border apprehensions, and in 2025, Operation Lone Star spent over $5 billion deploying state troopers, National Guard units, and local sheriffs to the border. State leaders argued that federal failures left them no choice but to act. By the end of 2025, dozens of counties had signed agreements with ICE, and detention facilities were expanded to handle the surge. The politics of 2025 hardened Texas's stance. Voters across the state supported the measures by wide margins, and governor-led campaigns made immigration the defining issue of the year. Lawsuits challenged SB 4, but even with injunctions, the infrastructure, funding, personnel, and county mandates continued to expand. For 2026, Texas is poised to see the largest increase in state-driven deportations in U.S. history. Experts predict a 40 to 50% jump in removals as SB 8 takes full effect, forcing every county sheriff into ICE cooperation. Combined with billions in state funding and unparalleled border resources, Texas is creating an enforcement machine unmatched anywhere else in America. By 2026, Texas won't just be cracking down. It will be defining the national playbook for state-led immigration enforcement. For undocumented immigrants, no state will be tougher or more relentless.